There are days when the world feels loud, too loud, and then there are days when silence says everything. This was one of those days. A man carried the weight of battle in every step he took. He didn't want attention or sympathy. All he wanted was a quiet workout, a chance to push away the echoes of war for just a little while. But that morning, the walls of the gym would tremble, not from the pounding of weights, but from the sting of mockery. No one knew his story. No one knew what he'd given, what he'd lost. But as he stepped through those doors, a quiet storm began, because sometimes it's the footsteps of a silent hero that awaken a city's conscience. This is Everyday Quiet Heroes. If these stories move you, if they remind you of the unseen courage in the world around us, please like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes a single click helps a hero's voice be heard. It was a blazing summer morning in the West End of Houston, the kind of heat that made the air ripple above the pavement, that made even the breeze feel heavy. The streets bustled with the usual rhythm, cars honking, people hurrying, the city alive with its own noise. And in the middle of it all, a man walked, his pace steady, his back straight. A faded Marine Corps cap shielded his eyes from the sun, a worn-out gym bag hung from one shoulder. His gray t-shirt clung to his body, already damp with sweat. But what drew glances, what made people look then quickly look away, was the sound of his steps. Click, click, click. His right leg, below the knee, was a sleek metal prosthetic. With each stride, it tapped the sidewalk with a soft, deliberate click. His name was Jack Rains. Jack didn't notice the looks anymore. Or maybe he did. But he'd learned to let them slide off him like rain on a tin roof. All he wanted was an hour of peace. An hour to lift, to breathe, to be something more than the man with the missing leg. He reached the gym door, paused, and drew in a deep breath. The cool rush of air conditioning hit him as he stepped inside, along with the too loud thump of music and the sharp smell of rubber mats and sweat. For most people, it was just another morning. For Jack, it was another test of patience. He moved toward the weight room, his prosthetic tapping softly on the polished floor. He wasn't looking for trouble or pity. He just wanted to work. But silence, sometimes, makes you a target. In the corner of the room, 3 young men noticed him. Their eyes followed the rhythm of his steps, the way his body adjusted, the click of that metal limb. One nudged the other, a smirk, a quiet chuckle. Jack kept his eyes down, kept moving. He grabbed a barbell and started his warm-up, deadlifts, the strain in his back, the burn in his legs. This was familiar. This made sense. But behind him the snickering grew. One of the guys pulled out his phone, pretending to check a message, but the camera lens was pointed right at Jack. The whispers weren't really whispers anymore. To them, Jack wasn't a man, he was a punchline. Jack tried to drown it out, one more rep, one more breath. But every laugh cut deeper, not because they hurt his pride. He'd left pride behind in the sands of a faraway war, but because they reminded him that some battles never end. They didn't know. They didn't know he'd grown up in a small Kentucky town, waking to the sound of roosters, working fields before school. They didn't know that at 18 he'd signed his name and shipped off to boot camp, that he'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, that he'd carried brothers out of fire, that he'd bled for men who would never forget his name. They didn't know that the leg they mocked had been lost saving lives. They didn't see the medals, they saw the metal. Jack finished his set, wiped the sweat from his brow. He could feel the weight of their eyes, the weight of their judgment. He racked the bar, grabbed his bag. Maybe today wasn't the day. Maybe today the ghosts won. He stepped outside. The heat hit him hard, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness in his chest. Click, click, click. The sound of his prosthetic echoed in the morning air, but it didn't sound like defiance today. It sounded like sorrow. And that's when the black SUV rolled past. Logan Beck sat behind the wheel, his eyes sharp, scanning the street like he always did. A Navy SEAL for most of his life, even now, years after leaving the service, the habit hadn't left him. And as he passed the gym, he saw Jack, the way he walked, the way he held himself, the sound of that prosthetic striking the ground. It triggered something deep in Logan's memory, something from a battlefield long ago. A Marine had saved his life once, a Marine who'd walked like that. Logan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone, spoke a single sentence, and the wheels were set in motion. Minutes later, the sound of engines filled the street. 3 black SUVs moving with quiet purpose pulled up in front of the gym. Doors opened, they stepped out. Not in uniform, but with a presence you could feel in your bones. No words, no show, just respect. They lined up beside Jack, silent, solid as stone. Inside the gym, the kids saw them. The phones disappeared, the laughter stopped, because sometimes all it takes is for the right people to stand up to remind the world what honor looks like. Logan stepped forward. He met Jack's eyes. No pity, no sympathy, just understanding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a medallion, the seal trident glinting in the sun. He set it gently on Jack's bag. A symbol, a thank you, a promise. You're not alone. The crowd that gathered didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The silence said it all. And Jack stood a little taller, because that morning, a city remembered what it meant to listen. The street seemed to pause. The noise of the city softened as if even Houston itself wanted to listen. Jack stood among them, the men who understood, the men who'd walked the same hard roads, the men who didn't need to say a word for their message to be clear. The SEALs didn't come for spectacle, they came for honor. And as they stood beside Jack, shoulder to shoulder in silent unity, a message rippled outward, to the kids who had laughed, to the people who had turned their heads, to a city that so easily forgot the cost of freedom. Jack's breath slowed. His heart, so heavy moments ago, felt lighter. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't needed it. But as the quiet respect of these men surrounded him, something deep inside began to mend. The SUVs waited, the SEALs waited, and Jack stood in the middle of it all. No longer just the man with the prosthetic leg, no longer the target of quiet ridicule. He was what he'd always been, a Marine, a protector, a brother, a hero. Inside the gym, the mood had shifted. The boys who had snickered now kept their eyes low. They felt it, the weight of shame, the sting of realization. They had filmed to mock, now they wished they'd never pulled out their phones. Logan gave a small nod, a silent signal. The SEALs turned, filed back to their vehicles, and left the way they had come, without fanfare, without words. The medallion on Jack's bag glinted in the morning sun, a small but powerful reminder. But the moment wasn't over, not yet. As word spread, a small crowd gathered, people who'd been passing by, people who'd seen the SUVs, people who'd felt that something had happened, something worth witnessing. And then softly at first came the sound of applause, not loud, not raucous, but real. Honest, a city waking up to its own conscience. The video of the moment, the SEALs arriving, standing with Jack, leaving without a word, hit the internet within the hour. The same camera meant to shame him now carried his story to millions. The caption on one repost said it all. When real heroes stand up, the world listens. The gym issued an apology that same day. The young men's memberships were revoked. The manager offered Jack free lifetime access. But Jack didn't care about that. He hadn't come for charity. Days passed, and then something unexpected happened. Houston's mayor made a statement calling for better education on respect for veterans. Schools held assemblies. Parks put up small signs telling Jack's story, not his full name, not to invade his privacy, but enough so that others would remember. A week later, Jack returned to the gym. This time, when he reached the door, he paused again, but not because he needed to gather himself. He paused because of what he saw. Outside the gym stood not just SEALs, but other veterans, older men with caps and canes, younger ones with quiet eyes, a handful of civilians too, people who'd seen the video, people who'd felt that stir of conscience. They weren't there to make a scene, they were there to honor him. Jack stepped through them, head high, and as he entered the gym, the room fell silent. Not the silence of shame this time, the silence of respect. No words were needed, no speeches, just quiet understanding. From that day forward, Jack lifted with ease, not because the weights were lighter, but because the burden he'd carried, the one invisible to the eye, had been lifted by the silent strength of others. And as he moved, as the click of his prosthetic echoed through the gym, it no longer sounded like sorrow, it sounded like pride. What would you have done if you were in Jack's place that day? We would truly like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and consider subscribing for more silent hero stories.